large human skulls and skeletons that measured between 7 and 8 feet in height.
In 1856, beneath a quiet stretch of Iowa prairie, a construction crew cracked open the earth and found something that should not have existed. An arched stone vault containing 8 skeletons, each far too large to be human. The discovery made headlines for a moment, then vanished. But across America, similar stories whispered through history, until one reached the Smithsonian. The accidental uncovering. In the spring of 1856, construction crews in Burlington, Iowa began digging the foundation for a new building at the corner of Main and Valley Streets, ordered by none other than Governor James Grimes. Beneath the prairie soil, where only pioneer roots and glacial sediment were expected, they hit something strange. The shovels clanged against stone, not boulder or bedrock, but shaped masonry. As more earth was cleared, a low, arched vault came into view, 10 feet across, built with mortar the workers later described as indestructible. Curious, they broke through. Inside, the air was still and cold, untouched by time. What they saw next froze them where they stood. 8 skeletons lay arranged inside the vault, but these weren't ordinary human remains. Each measured between 8 and 10 feet in length. Limbs, skulls, rib cages, massive, intact, and impossibly preserved. The bones did not appear weathered or shattered, as might be expected in a decaying frontier grave. They were clean, carefully arranged, and protected by the engineered vault that surrounded them. A local newspaper reported the discovery briefly. Then, as quickly as the bones had been uncovered, the story was sealed. There were no photographs, no museum teams, no follow-up, only silence. Anatomy of an impossible. The structure discovered beneath the Iowa prairie defied not just expectation, but architectural logic. It was not a mound or a crude pit, but a stone chamber, arched at the top, 10 feet square and 6 feet deep from the apex of the vault to the floor. The vault's walls measured 14 inches thick, constructed with a cement-like mortar so durable that even seasoned builders at the site could not identify its composition. There was no sagging, no signs of collapse. Every inch had been calculated for stability and permanence. This wasn't improvised frontier craftsmanship, it was engineering. Arch construction requires a detailed understanding of stress distribution, something absent from most mid-19th century American homesteads, let alone undocumented underground vaults. The use of an arched ceiling, especially at that depth, implied not only intent, but mastery of building techniques typically associated with classical antiquity, not early Iowa. But it was the contents of the vault that turned mystery into anomaly. The 8 skeletons inside were not deformed or fragmentary. They were well proportioned and well preserved, each one measuring between 8 and 10 feet in height. These were not isolated cases of medical gigantism, which typically present skeletal abnormalities. These remains, as described in the lone surviving account, appeared entirely symmetrical and human, just impossibly large. More curious still was their arrangement. The bodies were laid with care, evenly spaced, aligned along the vault's interior. There was no evidence of panic, trauma, or mass death. This was a planned burial, ceremonial in intent, and executed with architectural sophistication, unseen in any documented culture in that region or time. If accurate, the Iowa vault doesn't just suggest a lost civilization, it demands one. And yet, no further excavation was made. No academic debate followed. The silence that followed this impossible find was as engineered as the vault itself. The disappearance. What should have followed the Iowa discovery never came. In an era when unusual finds were eagerly circulated through scientific societies and Eastern newspapers, the story did not expand. It collapsed. After a single restrained newspaper mention, the record simply stopped. There were no editorials questioning the discovery, no scholars arriving by rail, no detailed measurements preserved for later study. The vault, the skeletons, and the questions they raised slipped quietly out of public view. Construction continued. Governor Grimes's building went up as planned, and whatever lay beneath was either removed or reburied. No documents describe the fate of the bones. No shipping manifests list their transport. No museum catalog acknowledges their arrival. Even the precise location of the vault faded as streets were paved and property lines redrawn. What remained was an absence that felt deliberate, though not dramatic enough to be called a cover-up. This was not the destruction of evidence by force. It was something far more effective. The discovery was left undocumented, unexamined, and therefore unchallenging. Without photographs or institutional custody, the skeletons could be dismissed as exaggeration, frontier misunderstanding, or simple error. Silence did the work that denial never could. What makes this absence so unsettling is how unusual it was for the time. The mid-19th century was defined by collection. Fossils, tools, bones, and artifacts flowed eastward to universities and museums hungry for material that could define a young nation's past. Yet in this case, nothing was preserved, nothing was debated, and nothing was displayed. The Iowa giants were not disproven, they were bypassed. And that distinction matters because it points toward a pattern that would soon appear far beyond a single construction site. The pattern across America. What happened in Iowa did not stay in Iowa. Throughout the 19th century, reports of oversized skeletons, unusual burial structures, and unexplained artifacts surfaced across the American heartland. Newspapers from Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee described eerily similar discoveries, remains ranging from 7 to 9 feet tall, often found in burial mounds aligned with rivers or high terrain. These weren't isolated bones or disarticulated fragments. Many were described as complete skeletons laid out in formal arrangements, accompanied by tools, copper ornaments, and evidence of ceremonial practice. In 1891, excavations in Madison, Wisconsin, uncovered a set of skeletons described as being of monstrous size. Though briefly reported, the find disappeared from academic scrutiny. In Tennessee, accounts from the early 1800s spoke of stone-lined burial chambers filled with skeletal remains too large to belong to any known indigenous group. Ohio's Great Serpent Mound region yielded similar stories. Vaults containing bones far larger than average, often encased in red ochre or entombed in clay layers suggestive of ritual preservation. Across these locations, the conditions echoed the Iowa vault: engineered spaces, signs of intentional design, and remains that violated expectations of scale. What bound these finds together wasn't just their size, but their treatment. The sites were rarely excavated systematically. The bones were not preserved or analyzed. Often they were lost to weather, farming, or construction before any institutional attention could intervene. Mapped together, the locations suggest a coherent distribution, large skeletons appearing along America's ancient river systems, often near native mound-building sites, but built with distinctly different methods. Taken collectively, these finds raise a difficult question. If this was a hoax or misidentification, why did it repeat itself so consistently, in so many places over so many decades, with so little deviation in detail? Buried in their own archives. In 1894, buried deep within the Smithsonian Institution's own annual report, appeared a detail that most historians never cite. During an official Bureau of Ethnology excavation near Lake Delavan, Wisconsin, researchers uncovered a series of large burial mounds. Inside, they documented skeletons measuring over 9 feet tall, some with elongated skulls and others bearing double rows of teeth. These weren't vague accounts from local newspapers. They were written observations in a federal publication, produced by one of America's most authoritative scientific institutions. Yet, after this single appearance in print, the story ends. No follow-up study was published. No exhibits were mounted. The remains themselves, allegedly boxed and labeled, were never placed on public display. Requests for access to the physical materials have since been met with silence or claims that no such items exist in the collection. This wasn't folklore. This was institutional acknowledgement, swiftly followed by institutional erasure. The Smithsonian, which by the late 1800s had become the gatekeeper of American archaeology, had encountered something that mirrored the Iowa find almost exactly. Engineered burial, outsized remains, and a ritual context that contradicted accepted models of North American prehistory. That it happened in Wisconsin, only 200 miles from Burlington, only tightens the pattern: the vaults, the skeletons, the quiet disappearances. When discoveries of this scale vanish from the very institutions tasked with preserving them, the silence becomes more revealing than any formal denial. The omission wasn't accidental, it was strategic, because to acknowledge one of these discoveries would have required rewriting the story of them all. What they chose to forget. The vanishing of these discoveries wasn't always orchestrated by conspiracy. More often, it was shaped by quieter forces, professional incentives, institutional priorities, and the comfort of established narratives. By the early 20th century, American archaeology had settled on a tidy framework. Native populations migrated via the Bering Land Bridge, developed in isolation, and built no permanent stone structures before European contact. Any evidence suggesting otherwise became friction in an otherwise smooth timeline. Finds like the Iowa Vault introduced complexity that didn't fit. Engineering knowledge implied education. Oversized remains hinted at biological variation unexplained by modern populations. Ceremonial burial chambers required cultural organization. These weren't footnotes, they were foundational challenges. And for institutions that had built their authority on coherence and control, challenges were often filed away, cataloged into obscurity, or never accepted in the first place. Silence became policy, not by decree, but by omission. When artifacts are excluded from exhibitions, when field notes go unpublished, when photographs are never developed, history does not disappear. It simply never entered into memory. Over time, the exclusion becomes invisible. And with each generation of scholars trained in what remains, the full outline of what was lost becomes harder to recover. What vanished wasn't just evidence, it was possibility. They uncovered a chapter that didn't belong, so they buried it again. But history doesn't vanish, it waits. Like bones beneath soil, truth surfaces when you start digging. So, if this story moves something in you, hit subscribe, share your thoughts below, and we'll keep unearthing together.